Now let's start the Microsoft Excel training. In today's lecture, we will first talk about the data cell referencing in Excel, and then we will focus on Excel functions. I will introduce you the PMT, payment function, and then we will use the payment function to create a mortgage amortization table. In Excel, we have three types of data cell referencing. They are relative referencing, absolute referencing, and mixed referencing. Let's see an example how they are different. In this spreadsheet table, I'm about to create a profit calculator for a company. Before we talk about how we calculate the profit, we need to know a very important place. It's called a formula bar. It's on top of the data cells. On the left, you will see a FX, and then on the right, you will see a blank area. This area is called a formula bar. By FX, we have a check sign. This is a confirm button. Every time when you activate a data cell in spreadsheet, any value you input in the data cell will also show up in the formula bar. After you confirm the change, you can click the check sign. So now I want to create the total value for the sales revenues for this company in 10 years. It's from the year of 2002 to the year of 2012. What I can do is I click on cell E18, which is the total value of sales revenues, and then type in equal sign E7 plus E8 plus E9 until I plus E17. After that, I can click the check sign to calculate the total, right? Here we have E7, E8 until E17. What are they? They are the positions of sales in the spreadsheet, right? We use the position, each position to refer to the value in that cell. This is called data cell referencing. Data cell referencing. Let's see the value. After we click the check sign by FX, we find out the total for sales revenue is $1,132. This is a correct method to calculate the total for sales revenue. Do we have an easier way to calculate the total? Yes, we do. We can use the sum function. We can type in equal sign SUM, parentheses, and then choose the cells we want to use to calculate the total. We choose from E7 to E17. As you can see, between E7 and E17, we have a column. The column shows that we want to select a range of data cells. Remember, this is called a range of data cells. Now let's click the check sign again. We can get the same answers for the total of sales revenues. Now let's take a further look at the cell referencing we just used in this function. As you can see, we use letter to represent the column position in Excel. We use numbers to represent the row positions of each cell. We don't have any dollar sign in front of the column position or the row position. This type of cell referencing is called a relative referencing. Remember, the key feature of relative referencing is if you drag a cell with relative referencing to the next cell, either the row position or the column position of relative referencing will change in the next cell. And this is how they will change. If you drag a cell with relative referencing horizontally, then the column position of the relative referencing will change in the next cell. If you drag a cell with relative referencing vertically, then the row position of the relative referencing will change in the next cell. Now we want to calculate the total cost. Because we use the relative referencing in cell E18, so we don't have to type in the sum formula in F18 anymore. We just need to drag the autofill button of E18. In the lower right corner, drag the cell E18 to F18. Now we get a new value. What is it? If you double click on this cell, you will find we copied the formula from E18 to F18. Also, we use the relative referencing in cell E18 and drag E18 horizontally to F18. So the column position of relative referencing in cell F18 changed accordingly. It changed from column E to column F. Now let's calculate the profit for every year for this company. How can we calculate profit in business? We use sales revenue minus cost. So in order to calculate the profit for the year of 2002, we activate the cell G7 and then type in equal sign E7, which is the sales revenue for the year of 2002, minus F7, which is the cost for that year. And then we click a confirm button. Now we get the profit for 2002. How can we calculate 2003? Do we have to type in the formula again? We don't have to, because we just used a relative referencing in cell G7 to calculate profit. Now we just need to drag G7 to all other years. And then we can get the profits for the rest of the 9 years. We can also verify if the result is correct. Let's say we want to verify the year of 2007. We use 78 minus 50. We get 28. I have a question for you. When I drag the autofill button of G7, the cell G7, which is the profit for the year of 2002, to the rest of the 9 years, which position of the relative referencing in cell G7 should change? The answer should be the row position of the relative referencing, right? Because we drag the cell with the relative referencing vertically to calculate the rest of the 9 years profit. That's why the row position of the relative referencing should change accordingly. Now let's apply the relative referencing to calculate the total profit. We get the total profit. How can we calculate the tax owed? In business, we use profit times the tax rate to calculate the tax we owed to the government every year. So now, suppose we already know in the state where the company is, the tax rate is 8.5%. Now I know the tax rate, which is the value in cell J4. And also I know all the profits for the company. I can use cell referencing to calculate the tax I owed to the government every year, right? For instance, for the year of 2002, I type in cell H7, I type in equal sign G7 times cell J4, right? This is how we calculate the tax owed in 2002. we use the profit, which is the value in cell G7, multiply the value of tax rate in cell J4 to calculate the tax we own. Since we already learned the relative referencing, can we drag the cell H7 to the rest of the cells to calculate the tax we own? Let's try it out. Now you find some errors. For instance, in 2003, we made some profit, but the tax we owned is 0. This is obviously an error. How does this happen? Let's double click on tax owned for the year of 2003. We find out G8 is a correct data referencing to the profit of 2003, but the tax rate changed to J5. We don't have any value in J5, right? That's why Excel will give us an error. How can we always refer the tax rate to the cell J4? At this moment, we need to use something called absolute referencing in Excel. If you want to use absolute referencing, you have to put a $sign in front of the column position of the referred cell. Let's say here we put a $sign in front of J. J is the column position of tax rate value. We also need to put a $sign in front of the row position of the referred cell. Let's put a $sign in front of 4. Now we complete absolute referencing. Remember, when we use the absolute referencing, we have to put a $sign in front of the column position, and then we put a $sign in front of the row position of the referred cell. Once you put a $sign in front of a position, this position will be fixed. No matter how you drag the cell with a cell referencing, the position with a $sign in front of it will not change. Now let's say we drag cell H7 to the rest of the cells in the H column. What will happen? Now we get the correct tax owned to the government. If you want to verify, you can choose some value. Suppose we choose the year of 2003. We get 1.7 as the tax owned from the Excel application, right? We use 20 times 8.5%. We'll get a 1.7 as the tax owned. This is a correct answer now. Remember, if we don't use any $sign in the positions, the cell referencing is called a relative referencing. If we use two $signs, one is in front of the column position, another one is in front of the row position, then the cell referencing is called absolute referencing. If we only have one $sign, it's either in front of the column position or in front of the row position. Then the cell referencing is called a mixed referencing. Remember, as long as we give a $sign in front of a position, no matter it's a column position or a row position, as long as we give the $sign to that position, the position will be fixed. No matter how we drag it, the position with a $sign in front of it will not change. Remember the key feature of cell referencing. Now let's talk about Excel functions. This will be our focus of this Excel training. Remember, an Excel function must follow some general format. When we use an Excel function in a cell, we have to start with an equal sign, and then type in the function name, for instance, the sum function. After the function name, we have to type in the parentheses. Between parentheses, we could have one argument or two arguments or several arguments. Remember, you have to put at least one argument between the parentheses. For instance, in the profit calculator example, we put a range from E7 to E17 as an argument of the sum function. In this lecture, I want to talk about the payment function, or the PMT function in Excel. The purpose of the PMT function is to calculate the monthly payment of a mortgage or a loan. We have three arguments in the PMT function: the rate, the number of payment, and the present value. The rate argument represents the interest rate for the mortgage or the loan. Remember here, if the bank gives you an annual interest rate, but you have to pay back to the bank several times in a year, then you have to use the number of payments in a year to divide the annual interest rate in order to calculate the actual payment rate for the PMT function. The NPER argument in the payment function represents the total number of payments for the mortgage or the loan. Let's say you have a 5-year mortgage, and you have to pay back to the bank every month in a year. Then you need to use 5 multiplied 12 to calculate the value for the NPER argument in the PMT function. The PV argument in the payment function represents how much you get from the bank. Suppose you want to buy a house, and you get a $100,000 mortgage from the bank. Then this $100,000 will be the value of the PV argument in the PMT function. Let's see an example. Suppose Joe is buying a new house. He gets a mortgage $126,000 from the bank. The mortgage lasts for 30 years, and he has to pay back to the bank every month in a year. The bank tells him the annual interest rate of this mortgage is 3.15%. So now we want to use the PMT function in Excel to calculate how much Joe needs to pay back to the bank every month. Now let's design the application in Excel to help Joe to calculate the monthly payment. We have already got several data. For instance, amount of mortgage, right? We can type in 126,000 directly to the cell. We also know the annual interest rate and the number of payment every year. And the mortgage time, it should be 30 years. But before we use the payment function, we have to calculate certain actual values. For instance, the interest rate. Because the bank tells Joe the annual interest rate, we have to calculate the actual interest rate for the PMT function, right? We can use relative referencing to refer the number of payment every year and the annual interest rate. And then we use the number of payment every year to divide the annual interest rate in order to get the actual interest rate for the PMT function, right? So let's do this. We use D4, which is the number of payment every year, to divide D3, which is the annual interest rate, to get the actual interest rate. Next, we want to calculate the number of payment. We should use 12 times 30. We get 360 times of payments. This will be the value for the NPER argument in the PMT function. Looks like we are ready to use the PMT function. So in cell D9, we type in equal sign PMT, parentheses. Between the parentheses, we need to specify different arguments. The first one will be the actual interest rate. We need to choose D7, right? This is the value we just calculated. Then we use the comma to separate D7 from the next argument. The next argument will be the number of payments. It is in cell D5. D6, sorry. It's in cell D6, total number of payment, right? We use another comma to separate it from the next argument. The next argument will be the amount of mortgage, PV. It is in cell D2. So let's choose D2. After that, we can click the confirm button to get the value. Now we helped Joe find out he needs to pay $541 every month to the bank. Here we have a negative value in cell D9. It looks a little counterintuitive. So why don't we change it to a positive value? The way we change it is to add a small dash before cell D2. Now the value changed to a positive number. This is how we use the PMT function to calculate the monthly payment. But as you can see, in a monthly payment, we have two major components. The first one will be the interest we paid to the bank. The second one will be the principal of the mortgage. If we want to provide a list of interest and principal in details for a customer, then we can create a table called amortization. In the amortization table, we can show the customer how much he needs to pay as interest to the bank, how much he needs to pay as a principal to the bank every month. When we create an amortization table, we need 5 columns. They are the number of payment, monthly payment, monthly interest, monthly principal, and the balance for the current month. In the number of payments column, we need to create a series of numbers from 0 to 360 to represent different payments during the mortgage life. Because we need to pay the same amount of money to the bank every month during the mortgage time. So in the payment column, start from the first payment to the last payment, we want all the cells to refer to the cell D9, which holds the monthly payment value we just calculated by using the PMT function. In this case, what types of cell referencing should we use? Absolute or relative? We should use absolute referencing, right? Now in cell B14, which is the first monthly payment, I use absolute referencing to refer to cell D9. And then I can drag B14 to the rest of the cells in the payment column. As you can see here, all the values in the payment column are the same. They are all $541. Now I want to calculate, within the monthly payment, how much is taken by the bank as interest. In order to calculate the monthly interest, we have to know two factors. The first one is the balance of the previous month, because the bank will charge me according to how much I still owe to it. The second factor will be the actual interest rate. We calculated the actual interest rate in cell D7. So now, for the first month, we can use the mortgage we get today from the bank times the actual interest rate. Because we want the actual interest always refers to the same cell, cell D7. So when we use D7, when we refer to D7, we want to use absolute referencing. In cell C14, we change D7 to $D, $7. Now we get the value $330. This means in the first monthly payment, $330 will be taken by the bank as interest. How can we calculate the monthly principal for the first month? We use the monthly payment minus the monthly interest of the first month. Now we get the value $210. This $210 is our payment for the mortgage. Now I have a question. After the first monthly payment, how much do I still owe to the bank? We should use $126,000 minus $210. You may ask, why don't we use $126,000 minus $541? We did pay $541 to the bank. However, this $541 monthly payment includes the monthly interest. The monthly interest will be the profit that the bank gets by lending money to the customers. Therefore, in cell E14, when we calculate the balance of the mortgage after the first monthly payment, we should use E13 minus D14. Now in E14, we get the balance of the mortgage after the first monthly payment. To calculate the rest of the monthly interest, monthly principal, and the balance of the mortgage, we can select a cell from cell C14 to cell E14. And then we drag the autofill button to fill out the rest of the table. Now we have a complete amortization table. We can verify if we created a correct table by looking at the final balance of the mortgage. If it is a 0, then we create a correct amortization table. In today's lecture, we first talk about the 3 types of cell referencing. Please remember the key feature of different cell referencing. And then we talked about the Excel functions. We use the PMT function to create an amortization table. I will upload these 2 applications to eCollege. You can practice at home. This concludes today's lecture. I will see you soon in the next one.